the road where shadows refused to follow. The morning the story begins did not feel like a morning at all. The light was pale, thin, almost sickly, like a dying lantern flame struggling to stay awake in a world that no longer welcomed it. The plantation fields, usually buzzing with routine noise, lay coated in a strange, saturated silence. Nothing moved except the fog, which crawled low across the ground as though it had waited, as though it were searching for something. The three workers had gathered near the wooden gate at the far end of the dirt road, the very road no one liked to walk after dusk. They stood shoulder to shoulder, stiff-backed, wide-brimmed hats pulled low as if that small shade could protect them from whatever their eyes refused to fully understand. Their boots were wet from the dew, but the moisture on their necks was sweat, not morning mist. Each of them carried within him a story he wished he had never lived through, a memory he would have gladly forgotten if forgetting were possible on this land. The road ahead stretched like a dark ribbon woven into the forest. Trees leaned inward unnaturally, their twisted branches forming arches that resembled skeletal hands reaching down to snatch anyone who dared to pass beneath. The workers had walked that road thousands of times, but this morning it looked different, older somehow, more aware. The air itself felt heavier, pressing against their lungs as though warning them to turn back. But they didn't turn back, because standing at the far end of the road was the figure that had haunted their nights, their thoughts, their breath. A girl, a lone girl, wearing a simple dress that once must have been white, but now carried the murky tint of river water soaked too long into fabric. Her hair hung damp against her shoulders, unmoving despite the breeze. Her posture was still, too still, not the stillness of a living being, but the stillness of something waiting. It was her presence that kept the men rooted where they stood, but it was the absence beside her that sent the cold slithering through their bones. The girl had no shadow, none at all. The dirt road was bright enough that their own shadows stretched long and clear behind them, dark impressions of themselves printed on the ground. The fence posts cast shadows. The trees cast shadows. Even the mist cast faint ones as it drifted through the thinning light. But the girl, she stood like an empty cutout in the world, untouched by the rules of nature. One worker swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the humidity. The others exchanged rigid glances, each silently begging the others to say something first, to break the dread wrapping around them like a noose tightening one quiet second at a time. No one did, because every time they had seen her, if what they had seen could truly be called her, the same rule applied. Whoever spoke first felt the chill more violently, as though the very act of acknowledging her existence bound them closer to her. And none of them wanted that. The girl's bare feet were planted on the wet ground, leaving no footprints. Her form was faintly blurred at the edges, as if she were caught between one world and another. She didn't sway, didn't breathe, didn't blink. She simply stood, watching. Or waiting. Something about the fog around her was wrong, unnatural. It didn't move past her. It circled her, wrapped around her like an animal fiercely guarding its owner. Every tendril of mist drifted with a weird consciousness, curling closer to her ankles, her dress hem, her fingers, and the forest behind her refused to make a sound. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. It was as if the girl's presence had frightened nature itself into silence. The workers knew better than to move closer. They had learned that lesson the first time they encountered her, that night weeks ago, when they thought she was a lost child wandering near the riverbed after sundown. Nothing about that night had been ordinary. Nothing since had been the same. That was when the first worker had stepped toward her, lifting his lantern to get a better look at her face. And the light from the lantern had bent, not flickered, not dimmed, bent away from her, as though pushed by an unseen hand. The flame had twisted sideways inside the glass, whimpering like a terrified animal. The worker had frozen instantly, feeling the warmth sucked from the air around him. His breath had fogged the air even though it was midsummer. His boots felt rooted, as though the dirt beneath him had melted into tar. She had turned, slowly, too slowly. Her shoulders rotated before her head did, and the sound it made was not the sound of human joints. It was the grinding of wet stones dragged across each other beneath the surface of a river. They had run that night. All three, but running didn't help. Not then, and not now. Because no matter where they went on the plantation, the girl appeared again. Sometimes at dusk, sometimes at dawn, sometimes at that eerie hour between both when the sun forgot its purpose and darkness forgot its patience. She never spoke. She never chased. She never moved toward them. She simply appeared, without a shadow, and every time she appeared, something on the plantation went wrong. A tool rusted overnight. A lantern exploded without warning. A horse went silent and refused to walk. One of the workers woke to find muddy water pooled beside his bed, though it hadn't rained in weeks. This morning, though, felt different. This morning she stood on the road as if she expected them. If she had been waiting. One worker clenched his fists hard enough that the seams of his gloves creaked. Another shifted his weight but didn't step back, fearing she might interpret the movement as acknowledgement. The third worker, the one whose voice was usually strongest, felt his lips trembling. The fog around her thickened, the sky darkened despite the rising sun. And then, the girl lifted her head, not by tilting it in a natural motion, but as though something invisible had pulled her face upward from below. The air stretched around her, distorting like the reflections on a turbulent lake. That was when they saw it. Not her face, but the place where her face should have been. And with that single glimpse, every worker felt the truth. This morning was not an appearance, that it was an invitation. And it was only the beginning. The girl did not move from her place at the end of the road, but the air around her shifted, tightening like the skin of a drum about to split. Elias Crow felt it first, the subtle pressure building behind his ears, the kind that came before a thunderstorm, except the sky above them remained pale and empty. No storm clouds, no wind, just that crushing, unnatural weight pushing inward. Samuel Hodge wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, though the sweat was cold. "She's closer than before," he whispered, but Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all felt it. The Hollow One had never appeared this near to the plantation gate. Before today, she lingered at distances, fields, treelines, riverbanks, places where the boundary between land and water blurred, where the world felt thin. But today, she was standing where the workers themselves stood every morning. Caleb Rowan swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on her unmoving shape. He was the youngest, and therefore the least skilled at hiding fear. His voice trembled. "We should tell the overseer." Elias's jaw locked. He didn't look away from the girl. "No overseer can help with this." Samuel shivered. "Then what do we do?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, his attention drifted toward something else, something almost too faint to notice. The dirt beneath their boots felt alive. There was a thrum to it, a pulse, not like the vibrations from distant machinery or horses. This was slower, heavier, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Caleb felt it too. He crouched and pressed his fingertips to the ground. The soil was damp, colder than it should have been. And then, just beneath the surface, he felt movement. Not worms, not water, something larger, something shifting. That he jerked his hand back immediately. Samuel stepped closer to Elias, lowering his voice. "This ain't right. She's calling us. Look at her. She's waiting." Elias didn't deny it, because he knew Samuel was right. The Hollow One wasn't just appearing today. She was inviting them. The fog around her thickened, curling upward like pale smoke rising from an unlit fire. The edges of her figure flickered, as though she were a reflection on disturbed water. But her feet remained firmly planted on the earth that no longer felt like earth. Suddenly, A sound broke the silence, so faint that if the men had blinked, they would have missed it. A whisper. Not from the girl, from below. Elias stiffened. Caleb's head snapped toward the ground. Samuel staggered back with a curse, his heel catching on a loose stone. The whisper came again, longer this time. As though a voice deep under the soil was trying to push its way upward, Elias finally spoke, his voice barely above breath. "This place ain't quiet. It's speaking." Caleb's eyes widened. "What's it saying?" Elias stared at the ground as though trying to hear the earth itself breathe. "Nothing we're meant to understand." Samuel grabbed his arm, panic breaking through his attempt to stay steady. "We need to leave. Now." But before Elias could respond, the girl lifted one foot slightly, not stepping forward, but raising it just enough for them to see something horrifying in a shadow. Of course. But beneath her foot, the ground did not react. It didn't dip. It didn't shift. It didn't compress. It was as if she weighed nothing at all. Caleb's voice cracked. "She's not standing on the ground. She's standing above it." Samuel whispered, "Lord, help us." The girl slowly lowered her foot again, and the dirt remained untouched, smooth, undisturbed. Elias drew a slow, trembling breath. "She doesn't belong to this land." Samuel pointed a shaking hand toward her. "Then where is she from?" Elias didn't answer. Because he had no answer. The fog around the hollow one expanded suddenly, spreading across the road like an unfurling blanket. The moment it reached the fence posts, they began to creak. The wood groaned under some invisible pressure, bending slightly inward as though bowing to her presence. Far out in the field, something answered, a distant echo, like wood splitting or a bone cracking under weight. The sound traveled along the ground in a low vibration. Caleb stepped back instinctively, but the earth beneath him moved, shifted. Something beneath the soil pressed upward for a brief moment, stretching the dirt like thin skin before sinking back into silence. Caleb recoiled in horror. "There's something under us." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Something buried." Samuel's breath hitched. "Or something trying to get out." The whispering returned, this time louder. Not a single voice, but several. Dozens. Layered atop one another. Some soft. Some distorted, some sounding like they came through water. Their muffled cries seeped through the ground, rising like trapped air bubbles. Elias's chest tightened. He had heard enough strange stories on this land to know that voices beneath the earth were never a good omen. Not in a place with a past as dark as this one. The hollow one slowly tilted her head, farther than a human neck should bend, as if listening to the voices. If answering them. The fog behind her parted, revealing a brief glimpse of the path beyond. Not the path they knew. It looked darker, deeper, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. Caleb whispered, "She wants us to follow her." Samuel shook his head violently. No, I'm not stepping onto that road." Elias did not share their confidence. His eyes drifted to the ground that continued to tremble under faint, restless movement. "We may not have a choice," he said quietly. The moment he spoke, the whispers from the earth surged upward in a violent hiss. The ground split. A thin, jagged crack tore through the dirt between them and the girl. A dark wind shot upward from the opening, reeking of river mud, decay, and something much older. The hollow one didn't move, but the crack grew wider, and the voices beneath the earth finally rose together in one singular, chilling cry, as if calling the workers by name. The sound that rose from the crack was not merely a cry. It was a summoning, a dragging force that reached into the air itself and twisted it into something cold, something ancient, something alive. Elias Crow felt the hairs on his arms rise as the voices beneath the earth stretched his name through the fissure, long, distorted, as if whispered by someone drowning beneath miles of dark water. Samuel Hodge stumbled backward, his boots scraping against the dirt. "They're calling us," he breathed, the terror in his voice raw enough to cut through the heavy air. Caleb Rowan shook his head violently. No, no, they can't know our names. They can't. But the voices continued, layered, wet, suffocating, each one shaping their names with unnerving precision. Elias, Samuel, Caleb, repeated again and again, overlapping like a chorus of the dead. The crack widened with a slow, splintering groan that a putrid stench rolled upward. Mud, rot, and something metallic, like iron soaked in old rain. The fog recoiled from the smell, twisting backward as though the scent itself had weight. The hollow one remained perfectly still, her dress stirring only slightly as the unseen forces beneath the earth expanded the fissure. She stood as though she had been waiting for this moment, this rupture, as though she had always known what slept underneath. Elias forced a breath past the constriction in his throat. This land was never empty, he whispered. We've been walking over something buried, something restless. Samuel turned on him. Restless? Elias, this is wrong. This is evil. Elias didn't deny it that a sudden chill swept across the ground. Caleb gasped and lifted his foot. Something cold and moist had wrapped around his boot. He looked down. A pale, mud-soaked hand had emerged from the crack, fingers long and thin, clutching his boot with unnatural strength. Caleb screamed. Samuel lunged forward to help, grabbing Caleb's arms and pulling with all the strength his panicked body could muster. Elias joined, gripping Caleb's shoulders. The hand tightened. A second hand emerged beside it. Both pulled downward. The ground was swallowing him. The voices beneath the earth grew louder. No longer whispers, but frantic, desperate pleas for release or blood or maybe both. Their cries blended into a single rising howl that shook the fence posts and rattled the iron hinges on the nearby gate. Elias shouted, "Pull him! Now!" Samuel dug his heels into the dirt, veins bulging in his neck. Caleb howled as the hands pulled harder, the mud beneath him shifting like an open mouth hungry for flesh. Then, a sudden shift. The hollow one lifted her arm, slowly, deliberately, and the moment her hand rose, the hands gripping Caleb's boot froze. Every voice beneath the earth cut silent. The fog stilled. The ground stopped trembling. For one impossible second, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the hands released Caleb with a violent jerk, retreating into the crack like frightened creatures pulled into deep, dark tunnels. Caleb collapsed backward into Samuel and Elias, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. Mud coated the bottom of his boot, thick and black, dripping like tar. Samuel stared at the girl with a mixture of awe and terror. She stopped them. Elias's brow tightened, or commanded them, because the way the hands retreated was not the behavior of something defeated. It was obedience. The hollow one lowered her raised arm with a smooth, unnatural motion. Her faceless head shifted toward the men as if acknowledging their terror. The fog around her tightened again, curling toward her feet like creatures seeking shelter beneath their master. Elias's voice trembled. She controls what's under the earth. Caleb wiped mud from his leg with trembling fingers. But why us? Why call our names? Samuel shook his head. No, not ours. Whoever's buried down there. Maybe they're calling to her. Elias's eyes widened slightly. That idea fit too well that he stepped cautiously toward the crack, but only a single step. The fissure remained open, a dark, hungry wound in the ground. The soil around it was drained of color, gray and lifeless. It wasn't always like this, Elias murmured. Something bound beneath. Something trapped. And she wants it free? Samuel asked. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the hollow one turned slightly, her body shifting toward the deeper part of the road that led to the abandoned well house at the far edge of the property. A place workers avoided even in daylight, a place where old stories whispered of disappearances, a place where people swore they heard crying late at night. The fog at the girl's feet began drifting in that direction, forming a faint path. She did not walk. She glided. Her feet lifted an inch above the ground as she moved forward, the air beneath her rippling like disturbed water. The fog followed her obediently, stretching thin tendrils toward the well-house road. Samuel stepped back. No, no, I'm not following her there. Caleb's breathing quickened. If we don't follow, will they come back? Elias looked at the mud crack still pulsing faintly beneath them. Yes, he said. And next time, she may not stop them. The hollow one paused several yards ahead, not turning her head, but clearly waiting. The fog pooled around her feet like a dark omen. Elias felt a heavy truth settle in his chest. This land wants its story told, he whispered. And she's leading us to it. Samuel cursed under his breath. Or leading us to our graves. Caleb, still pale and trembling, looked helplessly between them. What if this is the only way to understand why she's here? Why she has no shadow? Elias nodded once. And then, the ground behind them let out a low, warning moan. The crack began to close slowly, the soil drawing inward like a mouth sealing shut after tasting something it wanted more of. Elias tightened his jaw. We follow. Before it opens again. Samuel looked like he wanted to run far away, but fear kept him still. Caleb steadied himself, though his body trembled. Together, the three men stepped forward, toward the girl, toward the fog, toward the well-house road, toward whatever waited in the darkness ahead. The hollow one drifted on, silent, leading them deeper into the land's buried truth. And as they followed, the earth behind them whispered one final message, a message they couldn't fully understand, but one that chilled them more than any ghost ever could. Not all who rise wish to be saved. The whisper faded into the trees as the three workers stepped farther down the narrow road, following the drifting figure ahead of them. Not all who rise wish to be saved. The sentence echoed in Elias Crow's skull as though carved into bone. Each repetition felt heavier, colder, more certain. It wasn't a warning. It was a truth this land had been holding for far too long. Fog swarmed around their ankles as they walked, coiling like serpents slithering through dead grass. The morning light dimmed with every step they took, as if the sun itself refused to shine on the path they now traveled. Samuel Hodge wiped his trembling hands on his trousers. Why does she want the well house? He muttered. Caleb Rowan kept his eyes fixed ahead. Maybe she came from there. Elias shook his head. No, nothing comes from the well house. Things go in. They don't return. The hollow one glided ahead of them, her form flickering slightly, her hair swaying in a direction opposite the wind, if there had been any wind at all. For a moment Elias thought she turned her head toward them, but he quickly realized her facelessness made the direction impossible to read. Still, she felt as if she were looking. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No rustling leaves, no distant crows, nothing but the soft crunch of their boots on the road and the faint sound of water dripping somewhere out of sight. Samuel slowed. We should not be here, he breathed. This road feels wrong. Caleb swallowed hard. Everything feels wrong. They reached a bend in the path, a place where the trees grew closer, branches twisted over the road like ribs forming a cage. Beyond that bend, the old well house waited. The hollow one drifted through the arch of branches, disappearing into a thicker patch of fog. Elias quickened his pace, fearing that losing sight of her might provoke whatever lay beneath the soil into rising again. When the three workers crossed beneath the skeletal branches, the temperature dropped instantly, so sharply that Elias's breath turned to frost in front of him. Samuel swore and rubbed his arms, but his palms offered no warmth. They stepped out from beneath the dark canopy and saw it. The well house, the weather-beaten wooden hut, its roof half collapsed, leaning as though the earth beneath it had shifted or groaned. The boards on the walls were warped and blackened, not by fire, but by rot so deep it almost pulsed. The small window on the left side was shattered, shards of glass spread across the ground like a forgotten grave offering. But the worst part was the door. The door hung open, not wide, just enough for a thin body to slip through. Just enough for something inside to breathe fresh air. Samuel's voice cracked. It wasn't open yesterday. Elias nodded grimly. Nothing good ever opens on its own. Caleb stared at the hollow one, who hovered before the open doorway, untouched by the cold, her hair drifting like she stood underwater. The fog gathered around her feet, swirling as if eager. Elias stepped forward slowly, raising a hand to halt the others. We move together, and we don't look into the well unless we must. Samuel whispered. You think she wants us to? Elias didn't answer, because deep down, he feared the answer was yes. The girl lifted her head slightly, and the air in front of the well house grew distorted, thick, rippling with a strange pressure. The three men braced themselves as the fog suddenly rushed forward, pulled toward the open doorway like smoke drawn into a furnace. Caleb clutched Elias's arm. What's happening? Elias steadied him. Something in there is breathing. They stepped closer, the old boards creaking under their weight. The hollow one glided into the doorway effortlessly, passing through the wooden frame without disturbing a single splinter. The men exchanged looks of dread before following her. Inside, the well house was colder, darker, quieter. The air clung to their lungs like damp cloth. Dust floated through frozen shafts of dim light that seeped weakly through cracks in the roof. The wooden floor groaned beneath each step, trembling faintly as though recoiling from the weight of the living. The well sat in the center of the room, an old stone mouth wide enough for a grown man to fall into. The rope that once held the bucket lay frayed and severed, pieces scattered around the stones like the remains of some violent struggle. The water below could not be seen. Instead, the well emitted a soft, rhythmic sound that drip-paused as if something deep inside was breathing through liquid lungs. Samuel approached the rim of the well hesitantly. There's something down there. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't lean too close. Caleb stared at the hollow one, who hovered beside the well, her feet inches above the ground, her form flickering like candlelight in a draft. Her head tilted, not toward the well, but toward Elias. She was waiting. Elias swallowed. She wants us to look. Samuel shook violently. Then she can look herself. I'm not staring into that hole. But the ground disagreed. A deep, low moan rumbled beneath them, dust falling from the beams above. The floor trembled faintly, as if something below shifted its weight. Elias's knuckles whitened. If we don't look, it will make us. Caleb stepped forward, trembling violently, and peered over the rim, but not too far. I don't see water. Samuel crept closer despite his dread. What do you see? Caleb's voice shrank to a whisper. I see movement. Elias forced himself to step forward. He gripped the stone rim, leaning just enough to see into the darkness. First, he saw only shadow. Then the shadow moved. Something beneath the surface, something vast, shifted, sending ripples through a liquid that was not water. Elias's breath caught. A face surfaced, not human, not fully formed, more like the impression of a face pressed against cloth from behind. The features swelled against the murky liquid. Eyes, a nose, a mouth, but distorted, stretching and contracting as though trapped beneath an invisible layer. The mouth opened, the liquid shook, and a sound rose from the well. A voice so faint yet unmistakable. Elias, his name, spoken from below. Caleb stumbled backward, nearly falling. Samuel screamed and covered his ears. Elias staggered away from the well, heart hammering. The face sank beneath the surface, leaving only ripples. The hollow one shifted closer to the well. For the first time, her body trembled, not fearfully, but expectantly, as if the thing below had spoken the word she had been waiting for. The fog in the corners began to rise, pulling inward toward the well like smoke sinking instead of rising. Elias stared at the girl. Why did it call my name? The hollow one turned her featureless face toward him, and the ground beneath their feet spoke again. A single sentence rising from the well, clearer this time, drenched in ancient sorrow. Because you must open what we cannot. Elijah froze where he stood. The cold, breath-stealing silence that followed the strange humming felt like a fist tightening around the throat of the forest. The lantern's glass, once cracked only at the surface, now seemed to pulse from within, as if something behind the flame were pushing outward, searching for a way to breach the thin barrier. But the worst part wasn't the hum itself, that was the way the sound echoed back from the dark. In a higher pitch, if something unseen were mimicking it. Keep moving, Maeve whispered, gripping the edges of her shawl as though it were armor. Her voice trembled, yet carried a sharp insistence. Whatever answered that sound is not standing far from us. Jonas stepped closer, lowering his head so the lantern's weak glow brushed across the forest floor. The trees around them twisted inward, their limbs resembling skeletal fingers reaching for trespassers. Moss hung from branches in long, wet ribbons, each one swaying although there was no wind. We're past the old slave quarters, Jonas murmured, scanning the dark. No one comes this far, not even the crows. Elijah kept his eyes locked on the lantern. This hum, did you hear that back then? The day you saw her first? Jonas swallowed hard. No, but her presence always had a weight to it. Like the air thickened when she was near. Like now. Maeve's jaw clenched. If she's near, it means she knows we're looking for her story. As they walked deeper along the rotted path, the smell of damp earth grew heavier, mixed with something metallic, like old blood. The shadows shivered along the ground, flickering not with the flame, but against it, as though bending away from a presence behind them. That a twig snapped. Jonas spun, raising his machete. Nothing. Another snap, closer this time. Elijah lifted the lantern, its trembling glow stretching into the dark. That was when they saw it, that a narrow patch of earth, bare, smooth, and stretching unnaturally straight, cut through the forest. No leaves, no roots, no footprints. Just a strip of pure, unsettled soil. It wasn't here yesterday, Maeve whispered. I swear it. This is fresh. Elijah knelt, brushing his fingers across the path. The soil twitched beneath his touch, shifting like disturbed ash. He snatched his hand back. It's a trail, Jonas said quietly. A trail made by someone, or something, that doesn't want to be followed. Or does, Maeve corrected. The tremble in her voice faltered. This is an invitation. They stood in silence as the forest thickened behind them, as though cutting off any thought of turning back. We follow it, Elijah said. His voice didn't rise. It simply existed with an unshakable certainty. Whatever is happening, her missing shadow, her wandering presence, the way she appeared by the stream, this trail didn't appear for no reason. Jonas hesitated, but nodded. Maeve didn't answer. She simply stepped forward, as if pulled by an invisible thread. The three of them followed the unnatural strip of earth as it wound between massive cypress trunks, across narrow gullies, and toward an area of the forest locals called the Quieting Grounds, a place spoken of only when lanterns burned low and the wind moaned against the shutters as they approached. Elijah's lantern sputtered violently. The flame didn't dim. It bent forward, drawn toward a point in the distance. What is it pointing to? Maeve whispered. The forest suddenly opened into a circular clearing. The soil was blackened, charred as if struck repeatedly by lightning, yet no trees around it were burned. At the center stood a stone well, ancient enough that moss had consumed most of its surface. Thick ropes, cut, frayed and hanging, draped over the edge. The hum returned, soft at first, then deeper, then layered, multiple tones, rising and falling, weaving through one another like voices trapped beneath water. Jonas' grip on the machete tightened. That's not human. Elijah stepped toward the well. His heart hammered so hard he felt it trembling in his ribs. But something inside him pushed him forward, an urge mixed with dread, curiosity, and a sense that the well itself held answers. Maeve whispered sharply, "Elijah, don't." But he didn't stop. The lantern flickered again, its flame flattening, as though pushed by a heavy breath rising from the well. Elijah leaned over the stone edge and lifted the lantern just enough to cast light downward. He expected darkness, but instead, he saw movement, a slow, swirling motion far below, like shadows twisting in water. And within that swirling darkness was the faint outline of a girl's figure, thin, still, her hair floating around her as though submerged, her dress drifting in currents that did not exist. She faced the opposite direction, turned away, her body suspended in the unnatural dark. But the worst, the most horrifying, was the fact that Elijah could see the well's interior stone wall through her body. Maeve gasped. "She has no shadow." Jonas staggered backward. "And she's waiting. God help us, she's waiting." Elijah's throat dried. He could not move his eyes from the figure. Why is she here? Slowly, achingly slowly, the girl turned her head toward the surface. Her face emerged from the shadows. Her eyes were empty, white and clouded like weathered glass. Her lips moved, and no sound came out. But the lantern understood. The flame surged upward, brightening, sharpening, until the light cut into the swirling darkness, revealing dozens of handprints clawed into the inner stones of the well. Elijah stumbled in horror. The girl's silent lips moved again. This time, her words appeared not in the air, but in Elijah's mind. Cold, whisper thin, scraping like metal. "Return what was taken." The lantern glass began to crack violently, thin fractures racing like lightning across its surface. Maeve grabbed Elijah's coat and yanked him away from the well as the humming expanded outward into a deep, vibrating roar that shook the trees above them. Elijah fell to the ground, the lantern clattering beside him. The flame inside roared high, illuminating the clearing with unnatural brightness. Jonas shouted, "Move! Move before she..." But before he could finish, the hum snapped to a dead stop. A chilling silence dropped over the clearing. Elijah looked up at the well. The girl was gone. The swirling shadows were gone. Only the echo of her words, sharp, ghost-like, remained carved into Elijah's thoughts. "Return what was taken." As the three workers backed slowly from the clearing, breath shaking, the lantern's flame dimmed, then flared weakly, and pointed them deeper into the forest, towards something waiting in the dark, something that knew they had heard her, something that would not let them leave unless they fulfilled her demand. The lantern's thin flame stretched forward like a crooked finger, trembling as though resisting whatever force dragged it toward the deeper woods. Elijah held it carefully, feeling the invisible pull tugging at his wrist. Every instinct inside him screamed to turn back, to flee the cursed clearing with its humming pit and its impossible ghost. But something far stronger bound him in place. Dread mixed with responsibility, tangled with the words she had carved into his mind. "Return what was taken." Maeve walked beside him, one hand pressed tightly over her mouth as though she feared releasing even a whisper. Jonas scanned the woods constantly, hand on the machete, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. The forest changed as they moved. The cypress trunks thickened. The moss hung lower, brushing their shoulders like limp fingers trailing across their skin. And the shadows no longer waited passively along the trees. They shifted subtly, like living silhouettes trying to hide from the lantern's light. We're entering Black Fern Passage, Jonas muttered under his breath. Seen it once from afar. Never wanted to see it again. Maeve's voice quivered. This place, it wasn't on the plantation maps. It wasn't meant to be, Jonas replied. Places like this, places that breathe wrong, were left alone even during the old days. Elijah swallowed hard. If she took shelter here, this is where her story went to rot. The flame jerked sharply to the right, forcing Elijah to stop. Ahead of them, the forest floor opened into a narrow corridor lined by walls of thick black ferns. Tall as men, their fronds curled inward like they were hiding secrets in their folds. Elijah felt a wave of cold rising from the passage, colder than anything he had felt near the well. Something about this path felt watched. Jonas lowered his voice. This trail wasn't here this morning. These ferns, they grow slow. But look. He pointed to the base of the ferns. Their roots weren't buried in soil. They were gripping old wood, decaying planks, like the remnants of a long-buried walkway that Maeve's hand trembled as she traced one of the planks. This is man-made. More like man-forgotten. Jonas corrected that as they stepped between the ferns, the temperature dropped instantly. Elijah's breath turned white. Maeve shivered violently. Hold the lantern higher, she whispered. It feels like something's coming from above. Elijah lifted the lantern. What the light revealed froze their steps. Hanging from the branches above were dozens of small wooden figures, hand-carved dolls twisted from old pine. Each had a hollow center where the heart should be, and each one hung by a braided rope of dried moss, swaying gently though no wind touched them. That Maeve's voice cracked. This is a warding ritual from the old times. These dolls are meant to keep a spirit trapped inside a boundary. Jonas shook his head. Looks more like they failed. As they passed beneath the hanging dolls, their wooden faces turned, all at once, toward the lantern. Elijah stumbled backward, nearly dropping it. They moved. The dolls continued to twist until every hollow-eyed face stared directly at the three workers. Hollow mouths yawned open silently, carved lines splitting wider than would should allow. Then, a faint sound, a low, hissing exhale. Maeve clutched Elijah's arm. We need to move. Now. They hurried down the passage, not daring to look back. The dolls' hollow exhalations followed them like a chorus of breaths drawn from cracked throats. The deeper they went, the narrower the passage became, ferns scraping their shoulders and whispering against their clothes. The lantern flickered erratically. Elijah, Maeve gasped. The flame, look at it. He lifted the lantern. The flame no longer pointed forward, it bent upward. Jonas tensed. Something's above us. The three froze, slowly, barely daring to move. Elijah raised the lantern toward the treetops. High above, between gnarled branches, hung a shape, a figure. Thin, suspended, arms dangling, hair drifting like it were underwater. The girl with no shadow. Her feet did not touch a branch. She hung in midair, bodiless, weightless, her eyes cloudy and dead, yet turned directly toward them. Jonas whispered. She followed us, but Maeve shook her head slowly, dread widening her eyes. No, she didn't follow us. She led us here. The lantern crackled suddenly, a sharp pop as another fracture tore through the glass. The girl's head tilted slightly, and her voice, silent yet painfully clear, pressed itself into their minds. Return what was taken before the night hour ends. Elijah's heartbeat hammered against his ribs. What was taken? He whispered aloud. What do you want us to? But the girl's eyes shifted past them behind them. Maeve gasped. Jonas spun around. The wooden dolls that had hung silently moments before were no longer dangling peacefully. They were upright, standing, their little wooden legs twitching as they stepped slowly into the passageway. Hundreds of them, blocking the way out. Each hollow chest glowed faintly, like something long trapped inside had awakened. Jonas raised his machete instinctively. They're not meant to keep her trapped, Maeve finished, voice barely a breath. "They're meant to keep us inside." The girl in the treetops vanished instantly, like a candle snuffed out. The ferns closed behind the wooden dolls, their fronds locking together with a rustling finality. Elijah held the lantern close, the flame shaking violently as though sensing what was coming. That a new sound rose from the dolls. A sharp, clicking chatter, building into a scraping chorus of wooden limbs. Maeve stepped backward, terror overtaking her voice. "Elijah, Jonas, run." But before they could move, the dolls surged forward, and the lantern erupted with a blinding flash, swallowing the passage in white light. For a heartbeat, a single, thin heartbeat, the world disappeared inside the blinding white burst. Elijah felt nothing beneath his feet, nothing in his lungs, nothing in his hands. Only weightlessness, only silence, only the sense of falling without moving. Then the light collapsed inward like a dying star, and the world snapped back around them. But the passage was gone. The black fern walls no longer stood tall around them. The wooden dolls no longer scuttled forward. The hanging figure of the girl with no shadow was nowhere in sight. Instead, they found themselves standing in the remains of what looked like an old, sunken courtyard. The earth had caved in around a rectangular stone platform sunk halfway into the soil. Vines choked the stones, and broken iron rings, once used for restraints, lay scattered among the roots. Jonas turned in a slow circle, his breathing ragged. "This place. I've never seen anything like this on the plantation." Maeve crouched beside one of the iron rings. Her hand shook as she brushed away the dirt. "These were used decades before we were born, before the old foreman burned the records." Elijah tightened his grip on the lantern. The flame was dim now, smaller than a candle tip, but still pulling them toward the far end of the courtyard. There, sinking into the earth at an angle, was a half-buried cellar door made of thick, rotting planks. A rusted padlock hung from a bent metal loop. Deep scratches raked across the wood, some old, faded, others fresh. Maeve whispered, "This is what the dolls were guarding." Jonas shook his head. "No, this is what the dolls were trying to keep shut." The lantern flickered violently, and the flame bent downward toward the cellar. "Return what was taken," Elijah murmured, remembering the girl's echoing voice that he reached for the cellar door. Maeve grabbed his wrist. "Elijah, stop. You don't know what's down there." "I know," he said quietly, "that she brought us here." Before Maeve could argue, a sound rose from beneath the cellar door. A scraping, slow, deliberate, metal against stone. Jonas stepped back instantly. "Something's moving below." The scraping stopped. A new sound followed. 3 knocks, soft, measured, exactly 3. Maeve's eyes widened. "Someone's inside." Jonas shook his head violently. "No, no living person knocks like that." Elijah couldn't tear his hand away from the lock. Something inside him, fear, instinct, curiosity, melded into a strange, cold certainty. "We have to open it." He lifted the lantern closer, expecting the flame to flare again. Instead, the flame flattened, almost sucked toward the cellar. "Help me break it," he said. Jonas hesitated. His face tightened. But finally he lifted the machete and brought it down on the rusted padlock. Clang. The lock cracked. Another strike, and it fell apart. As the cellar door shifted open a fraction, a cold draft poured out. Colder than the forest, colder than the well, colder than breath before death. Maeve staggered backward. "Elijah, something down there is old." "Too old." Jonas knelt and pulled the door open. The lantern dimmed further, its light barely clinging to life. A narrow staircase descended into pure blackness. Blackness so thick it refused to reflect the lantern's glow. From the depths of the stairs, a faint whisper drifted outward. Not a voice, not a word, just soft air brushing the edge of Elijah's mind. Like a memory trying to form. He leaned closer. The whisper sharpened. became a voice, a girl's voice. "You're late." Maeve's scream caught in her throat. Jonas dropped the machete, frozen stiff. Elijah staggered back, the lantern trembling violently in his hand. She's inside." But the voice returned, stronger, clearer, as if rising up the stairs. "Bring it back. Bring me back." The light inside the lantern suddenly blew outward, a burst of flame that surged like a breath being exhaled by the forest itself. The cellar stairs lit up for just a moment, just long enough for them to see what waited below. A small chamber, a cracked stone floor, chains dangling from the ceiling, and in the very center, a shadow, not a person. Not a ghost, a shadow trembling on the ground like a living creature torn from its owner. It twisted and clawed at the stone in blind desperation, as if trying to climb back into a body that was no longer there. Maeve clutched her head. "Oh God, that's hers. That's her shadow." Jonas spoke in a choked whisper. "So something took it from her." Elijah stared into the darkness, the flame in his lantern shaking as if in fear. "No," he said slowly. "Something stole it and locked it here." A sudden force yanked the flame downward, as if the shadow itself were reaching upward toward it. Maeve grabbed Elijah's arm. "We need to leave. Now." But before they could move, the cellar door slammed shut with a thunderous crack, throwing Jonas backward. The flame in Elijah's lantern exploded into darkness, and from beneath the sealed door came a sound that froze every drop of blood in their veins. A slow, rising laugh, thin, hollow, and echoing like something that hadn't laughed in over a century. The laugh reverberated through the sunken courtyard, thin, brittle, and impossibly old. It seeped from the cracks of the sealed cellar door like an unseen mist, twisting around Elijah's ankles, creeping up his spine. Maeve stumbled away from the door, pressing her palms over her ears as if the laughter itself were crawling into her mind. "Elijah, Jonas, don't listen to it." But the laugh didn't want to be ignored. It grew louder, wider, layered, like more than one voice laughing through a single desiccated throat. Jonas scrambled to his feet, eyes darting across the courtyard. "Where's your lantern?" "Elijah, where's the damn lantern?" Elijah looked down at his hand. Nothing. The lantern was gone. It hadn't been dropped. It hadn't rolled away. It had vanished, snuffed out of existence with the flame. I had it 1 second ago," Elijah stammered. Maeve backed into one of the courtyard walls, shaking violently. "It took the lantern. It took the light." The laughter cracked suddenly into silence, the silence so sharp it hurt. Jonas whispered. "It stopped." Elijah corrected him, his voice barely a breath. "No, it's listening." The cellar door began to tremble, very slightly, dust loosening from its edges. Something beneath it shifted, dragging across stone. Then, tap, 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 3 knocks. But this time, they weren't asking to be let out. They were warning them. Maeve squeezed her eyes shut. "We have to run. Now, right now." Jonas grabbed her wrist. "We don't know the way out. This place wasn't here a minute ago." But Elijah wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the cellar door and on the shadow beneath the cracks. The black, rippling spill began seeping out from under the wood, slow, like thick ink creeping across stone. Except it wasn't flat. It rose in faint ripples, pulsing like a creature breathing shallow breaths. Maeve gasped. "That's the shadow. Her shadow. She's trying to escape." "No," Elijah whispered. "That's not her trying to escape. That's her trying to reach us." As the shadow spread, the courtyard dimmed unnaturally, colors fading, edges blurring, air thinning. Jonas stepped backward, gripping his machete as though the metal might hold off whatever was rising. The shadow pulled around the old iron rings, the chains, the carved stones, and each object twitched as the darkness touched it. Some shifted, some scraped. One rusted chain jerked sharply, rattling like a serpent shaking off sleep. Maeve whimpered. This place, this whole place, was built to hold her shadow. But it couldn't kill it, it could only trap it. The shadow surged suddenly, splitting into long, reaching tendrils that crawled across the earth. One slid across Jonas's boot. He stumbled backward, and the shadow grabbed him. Not physically, but the temperature around him plummeted. His breath froze in the air. His body stiffened. Maeve screamed, "Jonas, move!" Jonas couldn't. His legs were rooted in place. His eyes widened, pupils dilating unnaturally. His skin turned pale, drained, as though the shadow were pulling the warmth from his blood. "Elijah," Jonas whispered, voice dry and cracking, "don't let it." His throat locked mid-sentence. Elijah lunged, grabbing Jonas's arm, pulling him with all his strength. Maeve joined, digging her nails into Jonas's sleeve as the shadow tightened like invisible ropes around his legs. The air thundered with an unseen pulse, a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living creature. Thum, thum, thum. Each beat sent the shadow deeper into Jonas. Elijah shouted, "Maeve, pull." Now, they yanked him free just as the shadow snapped backward like a recoiling animal, sliding away from them. Jonas collapsed to the ground, gasping, shaking violently. His skin was ice blue around the ankles. "Elijah," he choked out. "It touched me. It was trying to take something." His voice cut off as the shadow surged again, this time rising upward, forming into a faint shape. A shape vaguely human, a hunched silhouette, head tilted, arms dragging, long fingers tapering into nothing. But its outline flickered, fragmented, as if it had been torn from something larger. Maeve pressed against Elijah. "That's not her. That's a piece left behind." The silhouette straightened, slowly, unnaturally, like bones realigning after a century of stillness. Then, a small voice drifted from the cellar, quiet but unmistakably the girl's. "Give it back." The shadow on the floor froze. The girl's voice sharpened. "Give it back." The shadow convulsed, tore into itself, shuddered, folding and unfolding like a creature skinning itself. And then it sprinted, straight at Elijah. Maeve screamed. Jonas crawled backward. Elijah braced himself, but the shadow did not strike him. It passed through him. Cold swallowed his bones. His breath died in his throat. His heartbeat staggered. Maeve grabbed him as he fell to his knees. "Elijah, what did it do? What did it take from you?" Elijah blinked, slowly, painfully, and when he finally spoke, his words were hollow. "It didn't take something." He lifted a trembling hand to his chest. "It left something behind." Jonas stared. What did it leave?" Elijah turned toward them, eyes darker than before, pupils stretched thin, and whispered, "A piece of her." The earth vibrated beneath them as the cellar door began cracking open from the inside, and the girl's voice, now furious, urgent, closer than ever, rose from below. "Bring me back before the night hour ends." The cellar door splintered with a sound like bones breaking, sending a cloud of dust into the courtyard. The faint, crooked light from the night sky barely reached the fissures, casting jagged shadows that crawled like insects across the stone. Elijah staggered backward, still clutching the space inside his chest where the shadow had left something behind. The air smelled of wet earth and iron, thick with the weight of decades-old secrets. Maeve pressed close to him, her hands trembling against his shoulders. "Elijah, what happens now?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the cellar, where the darkness pulsed and twisted like a living heartbeat. Then he whispered, voice low and urgent, "We have to give it back. Whatever she wants, before the night hour ends." Jonas groaned, shivering violently. "We don't even know what she wants, or what we're supposed to give back. She just took something from you, and now." A shrill cry cut him off. The girl's voice, thin and desperate, pierced the air. "Now, or the hour will claim you. The words struck them like ice. The night hour, the one the elders had whispered of in fearful tones, was more than just time. It was a boundary, a limit beyond which the plantation itself seemed to unmake whoever lingered too long. Elijah swallowed hard, pressing his hands to his chest again. The piece of her inside him shifted, like a stone in water, uneasy, alive. He could feel it urging him, whispering secrets he couldn't understand. Maeve grabbed his arm. We have to find it. The thing she wants back, it has to be in the house somewhere. Look for anything she might have left, something tied to her. Jonas finally stood, clutching the machete like a lifeline. If it's down there, he gestured toward the cellar. Then maybe the only way to get it is inside. I'm not waiting for that shadow to crawl through me again. Elijah nodded, grim. We have no choice. The cellar, the shadow, it's not just a girl trapped. It's a warning, a guard, and a key all at once. The three of them approached the cellar, stepping over the blackened puddles where the shadow had recoiled. Each step made the ground beneath them hum faintly, as if the plantation itself was aware of their trespass. The cellar door groaned, swinging wider with a wet, sucking sound. Inside, the darkness seemed thicker than night, almost liquid, and Elijah's pulse raced with a mix of fear and certainty. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the shadow spoke. Do not bring her back empty-handed. Maeve swallowed. What does that even mean? Elijah's eyes were dark, wide, and distant. It means whatever we take from this place, it has to be hers. Not ours. Not ours to decide. Jonas swallowed hard and gripped the machete tighter. So we steal it, or we give it back. The darkness shivered like a sigh, curling along the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The air thickened so much that breathing felt like trying to suck air through stone. And then, almost imperceptibly, a shape began to glow faintly at the far end of the cellar. A small object, half buried under rubble, shimmering with a pale, greenish light. Maeve gasped. That has to be it. That's what she wants. Elijah took a careful step forward, his hand trembling over the threshold. It's not just an object, he said quietly. It's a memory, a piece of her life trapped here. If we take it, we might awaken more than just her shadow. Jonas's voice was tight. We don't have a choice. Either we do this, or the night hour ends, and we disappear. A pause hung in the air, heavy, charged with the unspoken fear of what the night hour could do. Then, almost in unison, they stepped inside, and the cellar exhaled. The darkness recoiled at their intrusion, shapes rippling, tendrils slithering like smoke. But the glowing object remained, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat trapped in glass. Elijah reached toward it, and the moment his fingers brushed the light, the shadow outside shrieked, a sound that made the ground tremble and Maeve clutch her ears. Bring me back. It was a scream, a roar, and a plea all at once, and the night hour had only just begun. The glow of the object pulsed like a trapped heartbeat, fragile and insistent. Elijah's hand hovered just above it, the air thick and viscous around his fingers, as though each movement cut through water. Maeve and Jonas flanked him, their faces pale under the flickering moonlight that strained through the cracked wooden shutters above. This has to be it, Elijah murmured, voice shaking. The thing she wants. The piece of her that never left. The object wasn't merely an object. It was a small, carved wooden doll, blackened with age, its features crudely etched, yet strangely lifelike. One eye, a faint, dark hollow, gazed upward as though it were watching them, and from its lips seemed to whisper in the language of wind and shadow. Jonas reached for it first, his hand trembling. I don't like it. It's wrong. Elijah didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the shadow at the door, which now writhed violently, pulsing in waves across the stone floor like black water boiling under a moonless sky. The tendrils of darkness were thickening, growing longer, reaching farther, clawing along the walls, pressing against every inch of the courtyard like a living nightmare. The doll pulsed in Elijah's palm, as if sensing the shadow's hunger. And then, a voice, thin and hollow, hissed from it. "Return or bleed." Maeve's hand shot out, snatching the doll from him. The moment her fingers touched it, a cold shock raced through her bones, burning icy fire through every nerve. She screamed, stumbling backward, the sound echoing through the cellar like a bell tolling doom. "Elijah," she cried. It's alive." The shadow outside recoiled, then surged forward, faster than anything they could comprehend. It twisted like a river of black flame, rising into the air with a sickly, wet sound that reminded Jonas of tearing flesh. The courtyard trembled beneath their feet. The plantation, the centuries-old walls, the rusted iron rings, the skeletal remains of shackles embedded in the stone, seemed to shiver and moan, as though the building itself were haunted with all the sorrow it had ever contained. Elijah realized, suddenly, that the shadow wasn't just one thing. It was layered, countless echoes of a life stolen, a girl trapped, whispers of all the others who had vanished here. Children, women, men, voices faint and broken, crying out from the darkness. Jonas's machete was useless. Not even a swing could touch it. The shadow didn't exist in the same dimension. It was everywhere, nowhere, a living memory of rage and despair. Then the doll began to levitate between them, spinning slowly. Its hollow eye glimmered with a sickly green light, casting ghostly shapes on the walls that writhed like living scars. Maeve and Jonas fell to their knees, clutching each other as the temperature plummeted, the air thickening with the stench of wet earth and decay. "Elijah," Maeve gasped. It's demanding something. Look at it." The doll's tiny mouth opened, and the voice that spilled from it was unmistakable, a child's, fragile yet terrifying. "Return, or I take more. I take all you hold inside." Jonas's skin crawled. She means what she said. It's not just a shadow. It's a piece of her still alive. "And if we fail," he swallowed, trembling. "If we fail, it'll pull us all the way in." Elijah's heart pounded as he realized the truth. The shadow outside wasn't only guarding the doll. It was the prison of her soul, broken and vengeful, feeding on anything living that dared linger too long. And the plantation itself, the very stones, the chains, the rotting wood, were part of it, feeding it, strengthening it, waiting that a sudden cracking sound echoed from the cellar's far wall. Dust rained down as another figure emerged from the darkness, a human silhouette, yet distorted. The girl, or what remained of her, stood hunched, her shadow stretching impossibly long, twisting across walls and floor like smoke trapped in glass. Her face was half hidden in blackness, eyes glowing faintly as if lit from inside with fire. You took it," her voice hissed. "Give it back." Elijah stepped forward, hands raised. We are trying. We don't understand what it wants." The shadow writhed violently, emitting a scream that seemed to scrape the inside of their skulls. Dust and debris floated in the air as though gravity itself had become uncertain. Jonas clutched his head. It's inside our heads now." Maeve held the doll close, her knuckles white. The moment she did, the shadow surged forward, black tendrils lashing at them, curling like snakes made of smoke and bone. One wrapped around Jonas's leg, biting cold and sharp, freezing him in place. Another brushed Maeve's shoulder, stealing her breath in a hollow gasp. Elijah realized they could not fight it. They could only obey. He turned to the doll, whispering, "What does it want? What do we return?" And then a whisper answered, not from the doll, but from within Elijah's own chest, where the shadow had left its mark. The truth, the memory, the promise, the pain, return it all. Jonas groaned. What the hell does that mean? Elijah's eyes widened. He understood. The shadow was not merely a ghost. It was a fragment of history, trapped pain, injustice, stolen childhood, stolen life. To appease it, they had to confront what had been buried here. The crimes, the suffering, the lives lost and forgotten by the world. A sudden gust of wind tore through the courtyard. The broken shutters clattered, the walls groaned, and the shadows surged upward, forming a massive, flickering shape. A girl, hunched but colossal, limbs elongated, fingers stretching like roots digging into their souls. Give it back. Her voice thundered, a chorus of hundreds behind it. Or die, or remain. Maeve screamed, Elijah. We don't know how. Elijah swallowed, clutching the doll to his chest. The pulse inside it was strong now, beating like a living heart. And then, as if a memory flooded through him, he whispered, the ledger in the master's office. The names, the stories, all of them. Maeve's eyes widened. Jonas's jaw tightened. The truth was buried in the plantation's papers, in the records of abuse and theft, the lives erased. This was what the shadow demanded. Not vengeance. Memory. Recognition. Return. And the night hour, the boundary that had trapped them, was counting down. The shadow's scream became a roar, the walls vibrating with its rage. Each heartbeat of the night hour hammered the stone like a funeral drum. Elijah turned toward the cellar, toward the room where the old master's desk had stood for decades, and toward the secrets that had never seen light. We have to go? Now. We return it. We return everything before the hour ends, or she will take more than our lives. The shadows surged again, reaching through the walls, the floor, the very air around them, like a living tide. Elijah, Maeve, and Jonas took a step toward the door, toward history, toward memory, toward a confrontation with the darkness itself. And the plantation seemed to breathe around them, alive with the weight of centuries, watching, waiting, demanding. The doll pulsed once more, violently, in Maeve's hands. The girl's voice rose, a crescendo of sorrow, rage, and longing that shook the ground beneath them. Bring it back, before the night hour takes all. And in that moment, the three realized the truth of the shadow. It was not only a ghost. It was justice.it was memory.it was hunger. And if they failed, they would never leave this plantation alive. The air grew heavy. The moonlight dimmed, and the first of the tendrils struck the earth, spreading like ink in water, reaching for them again. The night hour was beginning, and the shadow would not wait. The air in the courtyard vibrated with a terrible expectation, thick and almost alive. Elijah, Maeve, and Jonas moved as one toward the master's office, the room where the plantation's records had been kept, papers yellowed with age, ink faded, and secrets buried in dust. The shadow's tendrils pulsed behind them, sliding along the walls like living smoke, hungry, impatient, impossibly vast. Elijah, we have to hurry, Maeve whispered, clutching the doll. The night hour, it won't wait. Elijah nodded, the weight of the piece of the girl still pressed to his chest. It's not just about survival, he said, voice tight. It's about acknowledging everything. Every name, every life, every wrong. They pushed through the door of the master's office. Cobwebs fell from the ceiling like ash. Desks and shelves loomed in shadow. And in the center of it all lay the ledger, bound in cracked leather, ink faded but still legible. Jonas bent down, hands trembling, and flipped it open. Page after page revealed the horrors of the plantation. Names of children who had vanished, women who had been taken, men who had been broken. Each story was a fragment of the shadow they had been running from, the collective memory of a life denied. Elijah, this is it, Jonas said. This is what she wants. Maeve looked at the doll, her hands still trembling. We return it by remembering, by speaking it aloud. Elijah swallowed and began to read, voice quivering. Samuel, 8 years old, vanished in the woods. Amara, 16, taken from the fields. Jonas, John, beaten beyond recognition. As each name was spoken aloud, the air shifted. The shadow outside quivered and pulsed, tendrils twisting violently as if trying to speak in response, trying to correct, to remember. Each name, each life, it belongs to her, Elijah whispered. To all of them. To be seen, to be remembered. Maeve followed, reading names from the ledger, her voice gaining strength as the shadows around them writhed in anticipation. Jonas added more names, the three voices blending with the darkness until the air seemed saturated with history, with sorrow, with justice. And then, the moment they finished, silence. The shadow paused. It froze, tendrils suspended midair, the courtyard dim and breathless. The doll glowed one last time, faintly, pulsing as if exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. From the cellar, a sound, soft, almost a sigh. The girl's voice, no longer shrill, no longer screaming, spoke clearly, tenderly. Thank you. The shadows pulled back slowly, like a tide receding. The tendrils dissolved into the air, leaving only darkness, calm but forever marked by what had passed. The courtyard was silent again, but it no longer felt suffocating. Elijah pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the absence of the peace she had left behind. The hollow weight was gone. The doll slipped from Maeve's hands, landing gently on the floor, its glow fading into nothing. Jonas exhaled, shaking violently. It's over. But Elijah's eyes remained fixed on the darkened horizon, where the plantation stood silent and empty, yet alive with its history. No, he said quietly, it's never truly over. Not until the stories are remembered. Maeve nodded, understanding. And now, we remember. For them. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the courtyard with the softest whisper of leaves and earth. For the first time since they had entered, the night hour felt like it had passed, not stolen from them, but spent. They stepped out of the office together, lanterns flickering weakly in the cold night air. The plantation loomed, silent, yet the weight of history pressed gently on them, a reminder of the lives that had been lost, of the shadows that had been freed. Jonas looked at Elijah and Maeve. We survived, but I feel like we didn't just survive. We witnessed something. Elijah's voice was low, yet firm. We didn't just witness. We returned. And in doing so, we gave them a voice. A place in history. Something she should have had all along. Maeve's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the moon now shone weakly over the fields. And perhaps that's why she let us live. The three of them walked slowly toward the main gates of the plantation. The night was quiet, but heavy with memory. The stars above seemed distant, yet they shone brighter than before. And as they left the plantation behind, the faintest shadow lingered just at the threshold, like a protective hand, a silent promise. Not threatening, not hungry, but watchful. Elijah paused, glancing back one last time. She's free now, and so are we in a way. Maeve smiled faintly, shivering. Some stories need to be told. Jonas nodded, tightening his grip on the machete, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of the lives they had honored. The plantation faded behind them into darkness, but the echoes of its past, the children, the women, the men who had vanished, remained alive in memory, in voice, in shadow. And somewhere, in the distance, a faint laugh drifted on the wind. Not cruel, not threatening, but gentle, like a whisper of thanks from a century-old soul finally at rest. Elijah, Maeve, and Jonas walked on, knowing they had survived a darkness few could imagine. Yet the shadow of history lingered, a reminder of what had been, what must never be forgotten, and what would forever haunt the earth they walked upon. And for those who dared to return, who dared to listen, the story would never truly end. Because some shadows live in memory, because some stories demand to be told, because some nights remember everything. And somewhere, just beyond sight, the girl with no shadow smiled.